Hello, welcome to our webinar. We're going to talk about how moods arise from an intricate interplay between mind, body, and spirit, each of which are very important. Now, my name is Dr. Paul Goddard, and I'm also here with my wife, Olga, and you may hear in the background a little bit of clicking of claws from our dogs and cats. We're also part of our family. So if you'll be a little patient, I apologize for any background noise they may cause. You know, today I'm really here as more of a friend and a fellow traveler in life. I am grateful, of course, for my training, my experience. I am a licensed clinical psychologist with specialization in child and family. I received my Ph.D. from the University of Missouri in Columbia, and although I licensed to diagnose and treat psychological disorders, today I'm really more, as I say, here as a friend to share with you what I've learned through my training and over 20 years of experience since I received my PhD. And so I'm not really here to diagnose or treat, and I don't prescribe medications. Now, what I want to say is that if you are, of course, taking medications, continue. Don't stop suddenly and never without the actually trouble. And if you're in therapy, please continue. And if you're not satisfied with the care or the treatment that you're receiving, please discuss that with your providers. So I'm not here to replace your providers, but actually my goal in this is to help you to be an informed consumer. Or conversely, if you're a provider, fantastic. I hope that, and my belief is, obviously, that the ideas that I'm going to explore with you can help you in your role as a provider to provide the best care. And one of the things that we know is that the mind and our bodies, our spirits, they're very, very interconnected. And they affect each other. Let's say if I was to tell you that I have a headache, what would you know? Well, I'd argue you know nothing. Is that because I stayed up too late last night? Is it because I bumped my head? Is it because, heaven forbid, I have some of those, a lack of balance in the pressure? Is it I had too much to drink last night? Is it, well, heaven forbid, because I have some kind of a tumor in my head. What I'm saying with this is just because I have a headache means I have symptoms. And trying to treat based solely on the symptoms, you might completely miss the mark. And that's sort of, I think, the same thing if I tell you that I'm sad, depressed, anxious, frustrated. What do you know? Well, I think it's very similar. You know that there are some symptoms, but that doesn't necessarily tell you from. And sometimes there's just these messages that we didn't listen to. They got stuck. I really appreciate the work of Brene Brown. You may have heard of her before. She's done a number of researcher, has really studied vulnerability and then has written some books, including Daring Greatly and The Gift of Imperfection. And I do recommend her information, as I think that can be very helpful. So, what I think we know is that sensations and emotions something. So, for example, if I put my hand on a hot stove, what happens? Well, hopefully it hurts, which tells me, hey, move your hand and then take care of it, because you may have done some tissue damage by the heat of that hot stove. And I see in life that a lot of times people, at least metaphorically, will say, well, I was here first, so the stove should move. Maybe that's even true. But my hand is getting burned. Or conversely, they'll say, well, that somebody needs to turn that stove off, which could also be very, very true. But my hand's getting burned. Let's take it off the stove first, then turn it off. Or worst case scenario, I hear people say, oh my goodness, my hand's really hurting. Somebody get me some painkillers quick. I need some kind of, acetaminophen or ibuprofen or aspirin or naproxen sodium. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of all of the ways we have instead of just listening to it. Now, don't mistake me. I don't like pain any more than the next guy. And if we don't listen to it, sometimes we're leaving our hand on a hot stove. And I think emotions are very, very much the same, that they're just telling us something, just like the sensations do. And so what happens where we get so, well, I think about the quote, if we grew up in a home where emotions were vilified or regularly suppressed, remember, good girls don't get angry, or, big boys don't cry. Sometimes we really internalize that, and that can happen so early. I even remember, and I have good parents, but I remember them telling me, if you don't stop crying, I'm going to give you something to cry for, which didn't exactly honor my emotional experience at the time, of course. So when we start to stuff those emotions, what happens? Well, by ignoring, avoiding the emotions, we don't only miss out on the opportunity to learn and grow from them, but we also run the risk of having all that anger, the sadness, the anxiety, the shame, just accumulates. It just piles up. We talk about it in our subconscious mind, but sometimes that becomes very conscious also. And think about the story of the long bag. Think about those bags they used when picking cotton. This long drag, and all of the things we throw in that bag, we carry with us, and they weigh us down. They steal our energy. They wear us out. And so what happens? Well, we're, traffic jam. We're raging. We're crying at a Hallmark commercial. Oh, wait a minute, I do that. Anyway, we jump when it's a fork, or when somebody asks a question. Oh no, that sort of all of these things that become barriers. And I think it's interesting to look at what are some of the ways that we handle emotions that are really typical. And you notice there's three really typical ways that we handle feelings. One is we smash them down. We suppress the emotions. Well, there's an old saying, feelings buried alive never die. And you know what? My experience would suggest that's completely true, that the feelings don't disappear. They just build up. They fester. And they can cause anxiety, tension, depression, all kinds of different problems, many of them stress-related. And all of that energy that those emotions have, they sap away the energy we have to take to kind of try and keep them stuffed away. And I think about, an example that I think kind of illustrates that. I had a good friend who one evening was driving over to my house on his motorcycle to visit. And they had changed the road, and he didn't know that, and didn't have the best night vision, and bumped into a curb, and it threw him off the bike. And, well, he was wearing short sleeves, no gloves. Yeah, whoops. And landed in the gutter. Fortunately, he wasn't going very fast, and it didn't break anything, but you can imagine his hands and elbows were full of sand and cinders and gravel, and it was nasty. Well, it was only a couple blocks from my house, so he finished the drive and got to my house and said, well, let's get to work. And so we got out the tweezers and a brush, and we started picking sand, gravel, cinders out of his hands and elbows, and I'm sure it was uncomfortable. It wasn't all that much fun on my side, and I bet even worse on his. So what would have been tempting, of course, to do is to spray it with some painkiller and wrap it up and numb it out and try and ignore it. I mean, that would have been, in the short term, a whole lot easier than trying to clean that up. But it also probably would have led to infections and what could have built up and would have left quite a mess, I think. And ultimately, I guess the high risk would be, could it become those infections become gangrenous and even lose his arms or even his life? Well, that's sort of the worst case scenario. And I think with emotions, that again, worst case scenario would we destroy us, but do they tend to cause symptoms? Well, how about things like ulcers and all of those other things that our body uses to try and get our attention, to say, hey, listen to me. Well, a second way, feelings in a sense, is that blowing up, losing our temper. And it's just like that pressure cooker. And it builds up and builds up and explodes. And I remember as a kid, actually, my mom was cooking some beans in the pressure cooker when the safety valve popped out, and we had a geyser of beans, and we were scrubbing the kitchen for days, you can imagine. And that's a lot what happens when we keep all of those emotions inside and then they explode. Oh man, the mess we can make. Good, because hey, we got that out. But it really doesn't resolve the root of the problem. It just relieves some pressure momentarily, and it probably makes a mess and probably could really hurt, the people around us and cause even more distress and possibly guilt. And so that's where probably isn't very effective. Third, very common way to cope with feelings is by attempting to avoid them. Hey, maybe if I ignore it, it'll just go away. And what we do is just getting ourselves busy with any kind of distraction. It can be all kinds of talking, watching TV, eating, smoking, drinking, taking drugs, having sex. And we have so many different ways to avoid emotions. Isn't that the whole? We can spend an awful lot of time with our thousands of friends, but never actually really anyone else in person. And boy, all of those feelings are stirring around inside of us, and they don't just disappear. And we're so committed to that avoiding. And my experience is that the more we ignore, the louder those feelings get. The volume louder until either to them. I think again, I'll reference Brene Brown. She talks about how if you trade your authenticity for safety, you may anxiety, depression, eating disorders, addiction, rage, blame, resentment, and inexplicable grief. And part of that can be grieving the loss of ourselves, that loss of our true identity, because we're so busy trying to cover it up or avoid it. Oh man, and then what are we left with? Well, we're left with an emptiness and a grief for the loss of our real selves and the loss of our real relationships. Because how can we connect to people genuinely and in an authentic manner when we're actually not really there? It's a bunch of shells connecting to each other rather than real people connecting to each other. So my experience is that this can go around and around and around. Okay, what do we do about it? Well, we finally are faced with physical symptoms where our body's telling us, or emotional symptoms, psychological symptoms. Not that every single psychological issue is caused by unresolved emotion, but my experience suggests that many, and even the things that may have a more genetic foundation, those genetics just define sort of a range of possibilities. And then the environment and how we're dealing with the different factors will decide how those genetics are expressed. So one of the concepts that I use very, very often in my work is called the wellness cycle. And I work with teenagers, and those teenage years tend to be very full of emotional upheaval. You may remember the roller coaster of teenage years. I certainly do. And then I'm also working with the families. And being the parent of a teenager can be its own roller coaster, of course. Lots and lots of feelings. And so this is a concept I use very often. And as you start at the top, all of us were born. If we weren't born, I guess we wouldn't be listening to this. And hopefully we have some very desirable experiences. We have nurturing and love and acceptance and support. And those things really lead to some of those positive emotions. Now, of course, that's not always the case. Sometimes, for example, when a baby cries, what they're hoping for is someone will come and feed them. And by doing that, they learn that, hey, I can trust myself. Look, I can elicit support. I can get the help I need. And they learn to trust others. Hey, mom or dad or brother or sister, someone, grandma, grandpa, someone will come and feed me or change my diapers or care for me or nurture me. So I can learn that way to trust others and trust the world. And if in that context, I build these positive emotions, joy, happiness, good, hope, peace. Well, sometimes even starting very early on, those desired experiences get interrupted. And that can be through, painful physical experiences, like sometimes children have earaches or ear infections that are quite hard to soothe, or colic or other things. That's nobody's fault. They just are. And there are, of course, some ways to, but they're not necessarily easy to resolve. And other times parents are too busy or too distracted or have other things that are going on, their own unresolved issues. And then as we get older, there can be more experiences. I think about the third grader who's out playing on the playground and some child comes running up and, you're ugly and your mother dresses you funny and you're stupid and I don't like you and I'm not going to play with you anymore. Ha ha ha. Do. Well, we could punch them in the face, but then we're going to get in trouble for fighting, or we could run and tell the teacher and then we're a tattletale, or we could curl up in a ball and cry and then we're a crybaby. It's, wow, life is pretty hard to navigate sometimes. And sometimes, kids can laugh and say, oh yeah, ha ha ha, it takes one to know one. I don't know about you, but when I was a young child, I don't think I had that kind of resilience. And so that would have been a tall order for me to navigate that so successfully. So we have experiences. Maybe our parents get a divorce, or heaven forbid they die, or we may experience some kind of neglect or abuse or criticism or rejection. And what does that bring up? Well, often hurt, anger, fear, grief, guilt, hopelessness, all kinds of emotions. If we're extremely lucky, have someone who can help us through those emotions, tell the story of what happened and accept the feelings and integrate those emotions to our experience and keep going forward in life. My experience is that most of us probably didn't have some of that support that we needed, probably because our own parents didn't, and their parents didn't, and their parents didn't. And then there's just life. There's so many things that crowd in on us. And so those negative emotions get blocked. And then where do we go? When those emotions get blocked, it can come out in symptoms, things like depression, promiscuity, rage, theft, aggression, poor schoolwork, substance abuse. But they can also really lead to a lot of emotions: loneliness, pain, insecurity, hurt. And this can become such a vicious cycle. I think about the wonderful story of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the Little Prince, when he's visiting the asteroids and he runs into the alcoholic. And he asks the alcoholic, well, why are you drinking? And the alcoholic says, well, to forget. He says, what? He says, well, to forget that I'm ashamed. And the little prince asks, well, ashamed of what? And he says, well, of drinking, of course. How often do we get caught in exactly that cycle? I wish I could say I had never been, but that would be ridiculous. Of course I have. In the kids and families that I work with, that's often the case. And there's such a shame or hurt, and those primary emotions, hurt or fear, often get turned into secondary emotions like anger to try and protect ourselves. Back to what we were talking about before. Well, okay, so what do we do about all of this? And that's where we really, we're in a position where we need to tell the story that can help us to walk through that journey. That doesn't mean, jump on your local city bus and announce, okay, guys, I'm here to tell you my life story so I can get better. That's probably not going to help. But actually finding it safe and worthy to walk through our story with us. And sometimes that's a relative, sometimes that's a professional. Some of you, that's the role I'll bet you take with your clients or customers or patients. I know that's an integral part of my job every day, is to listen and to help people to walk through their story. And that can be sometimes one of the places we also get stuck. We can think of 1,000 excuses why we can't talk to anyone, or why we can't work through it, or why. And that's a great way for us to stay stuck. Let me quote, if I may, again, Brene Brown. She says, if we can share our story, who responds with empathy and understanding, shame can't survive. Such important words. And as we walk through the story and we find acceptance and we start to integrate these emotions, it's not that we stomp them out, we don't ignore them, but we actually integrate them. That's where we can reach almost a rebirth, the rebirth of ourself, of our authentic self. And I think about how important that is. And sometimes we fear that we're going to go through life being damaged, and that we need to be ashamed of that because we've experienced hurt or trauma or these other experiences. And I remember in the 10th grade, I was playing football and broke my left arm right at the wrist. And having the orthopedic surgeon set that bone was more painful than I can describe. But thank goodness he did, so that then it could heal correctly. And then, of course, it took time and effort for it to heal, and it took the stability and structure of a cast. And then I had to build up the muscles again, flexibility that I had lost, and that was quite a process. But I would argue, I'm really glad that I have my left arm. I use it quite often, in fact, as I'm going through life. I'm very thankful for that. And what I understand from orthopedic surgeon was that, in fact, when the bone heals correctly, there's a process called calcification, where that bone becomes stronger than the surrounding tissue. Actually, you can't break the bone in exactly the same place again at that point because it's stronger. I mean, not that you could never break your arm again, but not in exactly the same place because it's actually stronger. So we don't have to go through life as victims, and not even just survivors. We can thrive as we integrate these experiences and these emotions. Well, why is this so important? Let's step forward and look at some statistics just for a moment. And I'm sorry, all of the statistics I have here are dealing with. No, I don't think the United States is the center of the world. I'm sorry, I don't have the statistics for other countries, but these were the ones available, and I think it's representative. There's so many people who are suffering from anxiety and depression and many take medications. The interesting thing, more than 60% of Americans taking antidepressant medication have taken it for 2 years or longer, with 14% having taken the medications for 10 years or more. I think it provides some real strong evidence the medications aren't curing the problem. They may be helping to give us a chance to cope with the symptoms, but they're not curing the root. They're not. And many of these people are not receiving other support that might help them to work through some of the root causes, and increased nearly 400% in just a few years. And so many people with depression are not receiving the support they could have. Now, are medications the answer? I think it's an important question. And I think if you do some research, they have limitations. I do believe that there is a place for medications, and I have seen them. I also like to have some other tools to support health and well-being. And I think that sometimes the medications might help someone to have the energy and clarity to face the problems, but they don't resolve the problems. I think that's one of the things that the media, that people may have a higher suicide rate when they take antidepressant medications. And I think part of that is because they'll have more energy and they have more clarity. But if you have a very difficult situation, it didn't resolve that. And so that's where we can really have that most important, intense, deep, for the support to help us walk through the emotions that are unresolved. And that's where I'd like to look at sort of a more holistic approach. So you'll see here the different components that I think can help us to be able to heal our emotions, heal our minds, our bodies. The foundation, of course, is we have to have fuel. If we don't fuel our minds and bodies, how can they perform? And it's interesting how much of the is used by our brain. It's actually a pretty high percentage. If you don't know, I'd invite you to research that. But our brains use a lot of the energy. Well, if we're eating junk food, we could probably expect to have a junk brain and a junk body. And certainly I've been guilty of eating junk food before, but that's one of the areas where Olga has really challenged me to eat more healthy. And I think one of the things that helped me I was really convinced was learning that they put, I think it's, I won't guarantee it, but I think it's polypropylene glycol into the milkshakes of one of the famous fast food restaurants. And, that helps to create just the right texture. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I don't really want to drink antifreeze. That's kind of nasty. So I haven't had that actually in years now. It's like, okay, that's enough. And the difficulty with that, of course, is that a lot of our soils have become quite depleted. And often the fertilizers are just a few of the things that'll help the plants grow, but they don't really completely nourish it. Again, I would invite you to, if you're not familiar with this area of research, to look at what is the nutritional quality even of healthy foods, if you will. Even if it's organic, if the soils were depleted, they may not provide everything we would need. We'll talk about that some more in a minute. Of course, exercise. Our bodies need to be moving. And the interesting thing is when we're sad or depressed, sometimes the hardest thing in the world is to get moving. We want to curl up in a ball. And that's where, it's sort of what we need most is what we're having the toughest time doing. But that's also a really important part of getting the blood flow, that sort of thing. Rest, sleep. It's interesting. I was hearing about what is the impact of lack of rest, lack of sleep, like 6 hours or less sleep, on the incidence of Alzheimer's disease. And it kind of scared me. We need sleep. Our bodies need to regenerate, and we need to manage our stress. And one of the things that they keep finding in research too is that we need to turn computers, these smartphones, all of these things need to, they're talking about at least an hour before we go to bed, or our brains just don't relax and so don't sleep with your phone next to your bed. Turn it off. Let yourself decompress. Let yourself relax and let go of stress. Reduce toxic load. And there's so many different things in our environment that can be toxic. There are the chemicals, but then there are also things like relationships that can be toxic. And having that support to identify and release toxins in our world, I think is really important. And then you'll notice that we move up to that next step, that informed self-care. And I think traditionally, historically, there's been kind of a tendency, that doctors were the experts and we were the patients and we should just mindlessly do what they say. Well, and I think many doctors are talented and very intelligent, very competent, but I also think we're responsible for being informed. So when I go into a doctor, I have 1,000 questions and we explore options and alternatives and what are the advantages and disadvantages of any approach we're going to take to supporting health. And then that proactive medical care, which I think is so important. Now, I had mentioned, in that eating right, sometimes it's hard for us to get all of the nutrients and that's where I think it's really often very important to have a supplement, nutritional supplement, vitamins and minerals and those kinds of things. Even in some of the very mainstream medical research on omegas, omega-3 fatty acids, one of the things that they found extremely helpful to your brain. And this is, placebo-controlled, double-blind kinds of, the cutting-edge research among even psychiatry finds that omega-3s actually really help our brains. And so that seems like sort of a no-brainer, if you'll excuse the pun, that we supplement with those. Also with vitamins, one of the problems that we bump up against is that a lot of times vitamins are synthetically produced. We're taking basically a petroleum or a coal tar, playing with a vitamin, and then selling that. Of course, it's very inexpensive to produce, very cheap and easy to do. One of the things that we heard about and we tried was putting those vitamins in the oven, at 350 and leave them in there for a little while. What you'll find is they sort of melt down to a little pool of coal tar. It's what they were made from, and that's what they return to. What we really need is whole food. And so selecting vitamins carefully, I think, is real important. There's a lot of research that can help you to explore that. And then, of course, providing for anti-inflammatories and antioxidants. It's interesting to see how much the inflammation response is implicated in all kinds of illness, physical and psychological. And so having good anti-inflammatories and good antioxidants to help all of the stuff, I think is really important. As you can see, in our family, we use often the doTERRA Lifelong Vitality Pack because I think it's carefully researched and put together by the doTERRA group to provide excellent support. And
I actually want to interrupt a little bit because about lifelong vitality, because the reason why we talk about lifelong vitality also is we really did a very, very deep research on lifelong vitality, and we also challenged the doTERRA about the ingredients and about the source of the ingredients. So I would like for Paul to talk a little bit more about the vitamin A.
Yeah. It's interesting when you're looking at vitamins, if they're just giving the chemical names, it's almost certain that they're synthetic. If they give the whole food source of bioavailable vitamins and minerals, then, by the way, they're going to cost more. It takes a lot more to extract those from whole food sources than to play with a few molecules on coal tar. And so we were challenging them around what is the sourcing for the vitamins, including vitamin A. Any of your fat-soluble vitamins are, that's like A, D, E, K, because of course they can stick in your tissue. And I don't really need petrochemicals stuck in my tissue. I want whole foods nourishing my body, not petrochemicals sticking. And because they're fat soluble, those vitamins, they tend to kind of stick. And that's where we had looked at what is the source for particularly those, including the vitamin A that comes from a plant source. And yes, to do that. Another thing I want to mention, sometimes people talk about, well, how much is enough? And I think that that's great to work with your healthcare providers, or shoot, if you have questions, ask Olga. As you can tell, she has a lot of passion and would be happy to talk with you. But one of the things that I love about the research on the omegas is in some of this research, they were taking not just milligrams, but grams of omega-3 in the research. So your body actually can absorb and benefit from a lot of the omega-3s. And then with the other vitamins, one of the things they talk about is with the fat-soluble vitamins, you don't want to take too much because that can build up in your tissue, and that's right. But the risk of that, in my experience, that with a whole food source, that's much less from a synthetic source. And so one of the other really wonderful things about vitamins that the doTERRA group uses is that they use an enzyme delivery system to make sure that you actually get them. I had a friend who actually had worked for a time at a septic treatment plant, and he used to tease about all of the vitamins he would see floating by in what they were processing that hadn't even broken down. Then the body hadn't even been able to digest them, much less utilize them. So please be really thoughtful in your choice. We've chosen, I think, very carefully the vitamins. Yes, we even give some to our dogs, my puppies, because I want them to be healthy too, and I want them to make sure that they're. And so that's also, they're very precious to us. Those of you who know me and who know Olga know that we're very, very, very parents on our puppies and our dogs and cats. So another thing that I want to say in this is, now, are vitamins going to cure some of the psychological distress? Of course not. But they can help to support your body as you're doing the healing process. Let me explain what I mean by that. So for example, if I get, and I've had a few of these. When I was a kid, I was playing with one of my good friends who should go unnamed in case he ever listens to this. But and it was my fault, by the way, I was too close. And he very nearly chopped my thumb off. I was probably 4 or 5 at the time. And I went to the doctor and he stitched it up. I don't recommend that for recreational purposes. You have a lot of your fingertips and it hurt. I can show you the scar. It's still pretty significant. But he stitched it up. So did the doctor cure my cut? Of course not. The body does the healing. But the doctor creates conditions conducive to healing. That's what a healthcare provider, a doctor or a psychologist or a therapist or any provider, they can help create conditions that are conducive to healing. So whether it's acupuncture or it's herbs or it's vitamins and minerals, what you're doing is you're supporting your body in this miracle, I believe, the miracle of healing. And I believe it's just as true for emotions as it is for your physical body. And it's just as true psychologically as it is physically. So what else can support this? Well, I think that one of the really wonderful tools we use in our family, also from doTERRA, is essential oils. Again, we did a lot of research looking for which essential oils are most carefully sourced, most carefully produced, and most pure. And in looking for essential oils, they won't cure me, but can they support my body, my mind, my heart, my spirit, as I'm going through a process of healing? They won't do it for me, but can they help me to do that? In my experiences, absolutely can. You'll see on the one axis, there is kind of the physical, from fatigued to stressed. So remember that fatigued is just sort of that exhausted, and that stressed is just hyped up and that sort of thing. And then on the emotional axis, from no peace to no passion. So that no peace, again, is just really everything is stirred up, and the no passion is just, I've given up. And as you look at that, so what happens in that first quadrant? Well, you're angry, impatient, stomach aches, headaches, and you're exhausted, but you're overwhelmed. And what you need is something that helps you to calm, to soothe, so that as you're facing the emotions, you're facing the experiences, you're facing your monsters. As I often talk to the kids about facing your monsters, you have the support to do that, the clarity, the calm to do that. And then you'll notice in you might be unmotivated, discouraged, that chest tightness. So in this case, again, but you're just almost that hopelessness. And this is where you just need that energy to be able to work your way through whatever the sadness or the other feelings that may be going on for you. And that's helping to ease that. And that's, I think, what really just so helpful support to do that work. Third quadrant, you'll notice that you may be feeling hopeless, withdrawn, that chest tightness, lower back pain. But I tell you what, my lower back will tell me really quick when my life is out of balance. That's where you need something that'll help you to be inspired and encouraged, helps you to get that energy again to face your monsters and to deal with the stress and build back that passion for life, so that you have that energy to work through things and tense, worried, upset tummy. Well, I remember in my internship getting ulcers because I was carrying the world. I was trying to finish my dissertation. I was trying to heal all of the patients I was working with at the time. And boy, that wasn't fun. And I was holding it all inside at that time, trying to do it all. Yes, I know how to do this. Well, no, we all need help. Even for example, the best heart surgeon in the world won't do heart surgery on himself, him or herself. So, and then also that neck pain. And I think about what is our neck? Oh yeah, that's how we turn our head so we can face things. So sometimes this grounding, these essential oils can help us to face the challenges and the emotions that have built up. And I wanted you to just take a moment and look at, and certainly there are a lot of different ways to approach this, and we're suggesting one that in our family we found, these doTERRA essential oils. And part of what you'll notice, especially those of you who are familiar, you'll notice that the contents, which are the essential oils that are in, that they really, really fit for what we're trying to reach. So, for example, that calming blend that has things like lavender, which has shown so much to help with the calming and the stress, and then some of that like ylang ylang, which is so good for emotions. You can look through. I won't read all of the ingredients, but then the citrus, invigorating and help us to have the energy to get up and do the things that we need to do so we can live our lives. If we come down to that elevation, that's that helping us balance the stress, but also energy. I love the tangerine. If you've not smelled that, you ought to. It's a great essential oil. And I left kind of my favorite, the best for last, perhaps. And I guess that shows what I need. You'll notice with balance, it has woody, kind of that spruce and rosewood, frankincense. That it's such a one of sinking your roots into the ground. We can kind of get tossed all over the place by life and world, and having our roots firmly planted so that we can weather life's storms. But I'll tell you what, I love using balance. Put a little drop on, it's funny, on my earlobes, on the outside of my earlobes is one of the favorite ways I have of using that. And it's like instant smile, because it helps to reduce some of that stress. These, you really, really must speak with Ogun and have her send you a sample to try them and see if they have that same effect for you. Now, what you're hearing, of course, in all of this is that our moods really are a complex interplay of physical and emotional components. And that's where if we ignore either our body or our mind, emotions, we're probably going to get in trouble. And, we can turn to synthetic approaches to treat the symptom, find some really wonderful, more natural support to work on the roots and to heal. And one of the things that I'll mention, the goal of essential oils is not to mask the symptoms, and it's not for it to help us escape. It's not, but rather to give us the strength. So how can you tell if essential oils are working? Well, some of the old feelings may surface, and they may actually you may feel them more intensely. And that gives us an opportunity to walk through them and to release those emotions. And this can be really good. It means the oils are working. And they foster that healing, but they don't do the work. So they help us have some clarity and energy, but then we've got the work to do. So when we have essential oils and we're doing that emotional work, then that's where we can move forward in our lives in a really wonderful, wonderful way. And so that's where I really come number of experiences with myself and others, and what are the supportive qualities of the essential oils. So one of the things that I wanted to just take a moment and move us forward to is looking at, why are we doing all this work? Why do we want to go through the difficulty and perhaps even suffering of facing our grief or our hurt or our trauma? Well, we want to do it because life can be really wonderful. There's my to-do list for today. Count my blessings, wonderful things that are around us. Practice kindness. Love that idea of the senseless acts of kindness and beauty, and that not because I'm trying to get, I can, because that's who I am. That's what's in my of what I can't control. And that's a hard one. We all want to feel like we're in control, but when we try and control what we don't, listen to my heart. Has important messages for me. Being productive, but calm, not getting stressed out. And then the importance, just breathe. And again, there's great research. A guy by the name of Zajonc, Zajonc, did some great research on how the breathing associated with meditation and such has a direct impact on our brains by providing more oxygen and actually cooling our brains as we breathe in through our nose and out through our mouth. It actually helps to cool our brain. And when you talk about somebody versus hot-headed, it's actually more literal than you would imagine. It's funny how sometimes these sayings are coming from real phenomena that science can bear out. So I thank you for joining in this webinar. I hope that you'll not hesitate to ask questions. I hope that you'll look at, here's some contact information, and there's the email to reach Olga, goddardolga@hotmail.com. And she's delighted to hear your questions or concerns, and of course she can track me down. I'm happy to help too if I can be of any help. And then also there's a webpage, thespiritofawildorange.com. And I think that it can be an awful lot of fun to explore the information that's posted there. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for listening. And please reach out and let us know what you're finding in all of this that and benefits your life and the lives of those that you're reaching out to help.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you all of you for listening us. Yes, please feel free to contact me on my website or by email, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions that you have. Thank you again, and you have a day
in life.
In life, yeah.